have been violated by not having the right to vote. I think he violated every imaginable right of the woman who he bludgeoned to death and still isn't sorry for.
Douglas Murray walks into a hostile question time panel. He opens by attacking a Strasbourg ruling almost nobody in Britain wanted. Then he takes on Cameron's multiculturalism speech. Across the table, Mehdi Hasan has one move: tie every criticism to the far right and walk away. Murray does not let him. Watch the dodgers stack up. Watch a hostile room applaud the wrong man 3 times. This is one man against the House. Let's get into it.
I don't agree. The man who brought this case to Strasbourg, John Hurst, was sent to prison for bludgeoning an old lady to death. The European Court of Human Rights decided his human rights have been violated by not having the right to vote. I think he violated every imaginable right of the woman who he bludgeoned to death and still isn't sorry for. I think that this case points to the terrible thing that is happening in Strasbourg, which is that activist judges and ambulance-chasing lawyers are creating a situation where the ordinary human rights of ordinary people are routinely being trumped by the unordinary rights of people who have behaved appallingly in society. And I have to say there is one other reason why I think this is an important thing, which is that when David Cameron was asked about this at Prime Minister's Questions, he said that the idea that Strasbourg could force prisoner votes on this country made him feel physically sick. There is a serious democratic problem when something which has no support in the House of Commons, very little support, I think, in the country, and something which makes the Prime Minister sick is nevertheless forced on this country. So I think there's a second reason why this is a good thing, which is that it has shown that our Parliament remains sovereign and can override and ignore decisions from Strasbourg. That is a very important precedent.
Murray opens with a name: John Hurst. The man Strasbourg made a human rights hero bludgeoned an old woman to death. Murray puts the victim back in that room. The applause comes before anyone can object. Then he names the machinery: activist judges and ambulance-chasing lawyers. David Cameron said the ruling made him feel physically sick. No support in the Commons, no support in the country. Forced through anyway. That is Murray's opening 90 seconds.
Do you agree with David Cameron that multiculturalism in the UK has failed?
This is the speech that David Cameron made this week, where he talked about the doctrine of state multiculturalism, that had encouraged different cultures to live separate lives. We've failed to provide a vision of society to which they feel they want to belong. We've even tolerated segregated communities behaving in ways that run completely counter to our values. Douglas Murray.
Yes, I think he was right. And I think we should start this by just reminding ourselves what multiculturalism is not. Multiculturalism is not multiracialism. It isn't pluralism. For years, the multicultural policy has been able to glide along, in part because of that misunderstanding. Because of the misunderstanding that when you talk about multiculturalism as a policy, what you're talking about is solely immigration, or multiracialism, or so on. It's allowed itself an incredible easy ride, not least by the fact that this confusion has meant that any critic of multiculturalism has been immediately decried for years now as a racist.
Carl Bell asks it straight: has multiculturalism failed? Murray says yes, and then does something rare. He defines his terms. Multiculturalism is not multiracialism, and it is not pluralism. It was never just about immigration. That confusion bought the policy decades of free passage. Criticize it, and you were branded a racist on the spot. Cameron finally said it out loud in Munich. Dimbleby now wants Murray's own definition. Watch how fast it gets uncomfortable.
What do you understand by multiculturalism?
Multiculturalism
in the way
as a
that David
policy,
Cameron described.
as a policy, multiculturalism is the following. It is the idea that there is effectively no such thing as British society or British culture. There are simply different communities which you're born into. If, for instance, you're born into a community of an Asian background, you will be treated by government throughout your life as a member of the Asian community. If you're born into some other racial or religious grouping, you'll be regarded in that way. And that anything in that group could be different from what the norm in society goes on. Let me give one quick example I gave in an article yesterday in the Wall Street Journal. It's been quite commonly known in recent years, for instance, that girls of Pakistani origin have, at the age of 16, been taken out of British schools and married to older men. Now, if a white girl of 16 over recent decades had been married against her will to some randy old pervert who wanted to have his way with her, the state would have stepped in. It would have rightly said that that was an outrage. But, lo and behold, 16-year-old girls of Asian origin disappearing from their schools, nobody wanted to mention it because it could be thought to be racist. The idea was that there are different values for different people in society, and there is nothing more divisive than that, and I'm glad that David Cameron has called time on it.
There it is. Murray wrote it up in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, and now he says it to the room. Girls of Pakistani origin, 16 years old, taken out of British schools and married off. If a white 16-year-old had been forced into that marriage, the state would have moved instantly. Instead, nobody wanted to mention it, because it might sound racist. 2 sets of rules for 2 sets of citizens. Listen to that applause. Now watch Mehdi Hasan try to answer it.
In answer to the question, I think he's wrong. I don't agree with Douglas's definition at all. I believe I'm a product of multiculturalism, not just multiracialism. My father came to this country in 1966. He used to write lots of letters to newspapers with his views on the stories of the day, and he used to get dog litter through his letterbox in response. That 45 years later, in my view, 45 years later, his son can sit here on Question Time with David Dimbleby and a Conservative minister and say that I'm a proud Briton and a proud Asian and a proud Muslim, I think is a testimony to the success of multiculturalism in this country.
Notice what just happened. Murray made an argument about policy, and Hasan answered with a biography. His father's letters, the dog litter, 45 years of progress. Nobody disputes any of it, but none of it touches the question. Murray never said Britain failed at multiracialism. He said state multiculturalism treats citizens as members of blocks. A moving personal story is not a rebuttal. It is a way of changing the subject while the room applauds.
And just on Douglas's point about anyone who goes against multiculturalism is regarded as a racist. A, that's not true, but B, let's look at the reaction to David Cameron's speech. Nick Griffin said it was a provocative speech. When Nick Griffin says your speech is provocative, you know you're in trouble. The daughter of the leader of the French National Front, Jean-Marie Le Pen, said she wanted to congratulate David Cameron on his speech, and the leader of the EDL in Luton said he's saying what we're saying, he knows what his base is saying. So when I hear reactions like that, I do worry about such speech.
Well, what do you think he was getting at? What was he trying to say? Do you think he was speaking in a way that he intended to appeal?
I think he did. And it's sad because, look, I'm quite critical of David Cameron, but in 2007 he wrote an article in The Observer in which he said we can't bully people into Britishness, we have to inspire them, integration is a two-way street, it's not just about immigrant communities, it's about all of us. And that David Cameron disappeared. 4 years later he turns up in Munich, of all places, to tell us that we need this muscular liberalism and to talk like Douglas about forced marriages. Sorry, how many people have forced marriages in this country? And show me which cultural group defends forced marriages and which government defends forced marriages. I've yet to come across a single one.
And there it is, right on schedule. Cameron gives a speech about state policy, and Hasan's answer is a list of people who liked it. Nick Griffin, the Le Pen family, and the EDL marching in Luton. That is not an argument about multiculturalism. That is a way of making the subject radioactive. Then he asks, which group defends forced marriage? Nobody defends it out loud. That was never Murray's point. His point was that nobody would police it either.
I've been very lucky. I've lived and worked all over the world, and Britain is by far the most tolerant society I've ever come across. However, what I'm concerned about is that I think Douglas was right. What seems to happen is when something is said, there are minority groups of growing vocal ability who will find offence in whatever you say and find a channel to get that offence shouted about. And that, I think, is part of the problem we've got now. But the bottom line is we are an incredibly tolerant society, and we should be very, very proud of that.
Well, look, I mean, both of the sort of left-wing people on the panel tonight, Mehdi and Jackie Smith, if you can still call Labour members left-wing, but both of them have done the same thing the left always does on this. You try to have a discussion about the failure of multiculturalism, and you have the BNP thrown in by Mehdi. They're told, well, the BNP member congratulated him, at least concede, Mehdi, all sorts of crazy and horrible and disgusting people can jump on a bandwagon without meaning that it's the wrong thing to have said. Maybe they're just opportunists. I suspect they are. And Jackie then throws in the example of the EDL and thinks, do you really think, Jackie, that was what David Cameron was aiming to do? I mean, a couple of, 100 people marching in Luton does not mean the Prime Minister of Britain should not be making a speech about a very serious matter. And this is the problem. The debate by the left is always attempted to be shut down by associating it with far-right extremists and racist groups instead of having a frank and honest discussion.
I did not.
Murray says the quiet part out loud. The left does not answer the argument. It finds someone unpleasant who agrees with you and hangs them round your neck. Mehdi brings the BNP. Jackie Smith brings the EDL. A couple of hundred men marching in Luton. And suddenly the Prime Minister cannot make a speech. Murray's answer is very simple. Extremists jumping on a bandwagon does not make the bandwagon wrong. Watch him ask Jackie Smith whether she believes her own accusation.
Say that he shouldn't make the speech, and I said I thought the argument he made in the speech was right, and incidentally it was one that we had previously made. What I said was it would have been appropriate, given that speech, to also say that when we're promoting shared British values against Islamist extremism, we should also do it against right-wing extremism.
And I think you can belittle the idea of a couple of hundred extremists, but if you put yourself in the shoes of a British Muslim in Luton or in other cities where the EDL have marched who live in fear of those groups, then I think they have a right for their Prime Minister not to go abroad to Germany and send them lectures from there on who isn't and isn't an.
Jackie Smith agrees with the speech, then explains what Cameron should have said instead. That is not a rebuttal, that is a retreat. And Hasan closes the loop. British Muslims in Luton live in fear, so the speech should not have been made in Germany. Notice the standard. The argument is never wrong on the facts. It is wrong on the venue, the timing, the tone, everything except whether it is true.
I agree with the gentleman who just said that Britain is a very tolerant society. Yes, it is very true. It's a very, very tolerant society. Sadly, the tolerance of this country has been abused by certain religious groups. And I completely agree with Douglas Murray when he said that Mr. Cameron has done the right thing, and I hope Mr. Cameron means business. Now, Mr. Cameron was making this speech in the context of terrorism. And what he was trying to convey a message was how we target terrorism. Unfortunately, this country in the last 15 years has not addressed the root cause of terrorism. The root cause of terrorism is bad teaching in religious schools, and that has to be addressed fundamentally.
An audience member says what half the room is thinking. Britain is tolerant, and that tolerance has been taken for granted. He points at teaching in religious schools as a root cause. You can argue with that diagnosis. Watch what happens instead. Hasan does not argue with it. He calls it rubbish and accuses the man of offending everyone's intelligence. Then comes the line that decides the night. Terrorism is political, not cultural. Murray has an answer ready.
Briefly, we didn't get into this, but one of my other objections to David Cameron's speech is the idea, you want to give a speech on multiculturalism, give a speech on multiculturalism. You want to give a speech on counter-terrorism, give a speech on counter-terrorism. Don't pretend they're one and the same thing. Don't offend our intelligence. Terrorism is not a cultural problem. Terrorism is a political problem.
No, and it's a religious problem as well. And it's a religious problem.
In your view, Douglas.
No, in the view of a lot of people, including the people who carry out acts of terror, who say they do it in the name of religion.
They also say they do it because of foreign policy, and you always ignore that bit, don't you, Douglas?
No, I don't.
When they say they do it because of Iraq, you don't notice that bit.
At least listen to the reason they say they do it.
Agreed. So why didn't he talk about foreign policy in his speech on Saturday?
I'm willing to talk about foreign policy, as would David Cameron be.
But
you cannot keep on pretending that there is no religious component to the terrorism, because there is.
I thought you said it was cultural.
No,
Culture and religion is not the same.
Stick with religion. You're saying there is no religious component.
I'm saying there is a religious component. I'm saying it's not a cultural component. The people who blew themselves up on the London Underground were not people who couldn't speak English or didn't go to secular schools.
That's the tragedy of it.
Well, then don't say it's a cultural problem.
No, but don't
pretend that forced marriage.
Because maybe you're doing what they were doing.
Count the moves in that exchange. Hasan says terrorism is political, not cultural. Murray says there is also a religious component. Hasan's reply is that this is just Murray's opinion. Then he pivots to foreign policy. Then he pivots back and says he never denied religion. Murray ends it with one sentence. Listen to the reasons the bombers themselves give. All of them. Not just the flattering ones. The 7-7 bombers spoke English and went to normal schools. Murray concedes that instantly and calls it the tragedy. That is what confidence in your own argument looks like.
If I speak at once, nobody can hear, so let's have a little bit of order, shall we? Let's have a question, please, from Gemma Perlin.
Could the introduction of democracy to Egypt have the effect of destabilising the Middle East and lead to a string of anti-Western extremist Arab states in the region?
The first thing is that to get back to the question, the issue of democracy across the region, some of us have been arguing for many years that Arab states, Muslim majority countries, have the same desire for democracy as the rest of the world. You used to hear people say about the Eastern Bloc, the Eastern Europeans can't cope with democracy. Lo and behold, they could. You used to hear it said about South America, the same thing. South Americans somehow can't cope with democracy. Lo and behold, they could. And the same thing is becoming clear across the Arab and Muslim world. The Lebanese Druze leader, Walid Jumblat, said that the sight in 2005 of Iraqis going to the polls for the first time would have in time a seismic effect in the region, because people would not see their neighbours going to vote and not want that themselves. Now this is coming sometime after most of us expected it, but there are obviously problems, and it's naive to walk into this and ignore.
Now the debate moves to Egypt, and Murray does something you rarely see. He argues that Arabs and Muslims want democracy as much as anyone. People said the same about Eastern Europe. They could not handle it, apparently. Then the wall came down. They said it about South America too, and they were wrong again. Murray quotes Walid Jumblat on Iraqis voting in 2005. He predicted a seismic effect across the region. That is not a small-minded position.
Do you see Mubarak, as Mehdi Hasan said, as our person, the West's person in Egypt?
No.
Or do you think we should have...
I think it's equally patronising to the people of Egypt to assume they have had no role in their own country. However, the West has had a very complex and I think unfortunate, regrettable situation in recent years of thinking that stability and the pursuit of stability in the region was the most important thing. That has come back to bite us again and again, not least in the rise in anti-Western feeling across the region. There is a problem, though, and it has to be flagged up to go back to the question, which is the Brotherhood. The Brotherhood, if it didn't have Muslim in the name, would be being described at the moment as a fascist political party. It has its roots in fascism. It is an extremist organisation. Its offshoot, the Hamas in the Gaza, when it got into power, immediately killed its opposition, and it hasn't had another election. It was just another one announced, July the 9th this year. There was meant to be another election in the Palestinian areas. The Hamas have said no. They are a one-vote, once political party, and we can't be so naive to think we can't... No. They cannot be so naive as to think that the Brotherhood, if they came to power in Egypt, would be anything other than a disaster.
This is the strongest stretch of Murray's night. He refuses to call Mubarak our man in Cairo. He says the obsession with stability over democracy came back to bite us. It fueled anti-Western feeling across the region. Then comes the line of the debate. Strip the word Muslim out of the Brotherhood's name and everyone would call it a fascist party. Roots in fascism, an offshoot in Gaza that killed its opposition and never held another election. One vote, once.
To intervene to prevent...
No. Let me clarify this. So the following. It is very unwise for leaders like William Hague, David Cameron and Barack Obama to be saying who they would like to run Egypt. It's a choice for the Egyptian people, and they should remain silent. But that does not mean that behind the scenes and elsewhere you cannot say that the government, whatever it is that comes in Egypt, has to abide by, among other things, international norms, peace treaties, including the Treaty of Peace that has kept peace between Egypt and Israel for 3 decades now. And this is a very, very important thing, because if the Brotherhood comes in and says, as their leaders have said in recent days, that they will immediately block the Suez Canal and start a war with Israel, then we are collectively going to be, and the Middle East is going to be in serious trouble.
How can you order a new government to abide by a treaty made by Mubarak?
Well, in the following way,
between Egypt and Israel. When you say you don't want intervention,
in the following way, by saying that by using soft power, by encouraging the country to go in a certain way, by making it clear that for Egypt to become a normalised country, it has to have a normal government.
Watch how careful Murray is here. He says Western leaders should stop naming who runs Egypt. That is a choice for Egyptians. But the treaties still matter. 3 decades of peace between Egypt and Israel rest on one agreement. Brotherhood leaders were talking that week about closing the Suez Canal. Dimbleby pushes hard on the obvious problem. How do you bind a new government to Mubarak's treaty? Murray's answer is soft power, not gunboats. Now watch the room turn on him one last time.
The big difference between Eastern Europe and the Middle East is Islam, and some would say that Islam is not compatible with democracy.
Okay.
Tell that to the Indonesians.
Yeah,
Indonesia is the
exactly.
largest Muslim country in the world and is a democracy.
The woman up there on the left there. Yes.
I find what Douglas Murray is saying objectionable. He's saying in public, oh, the leaders, we mustn't say who should be in power in Egypt, but actually you're advocating behind-the-scenes action and covert action to influence it. And you also seem to me to be saying that the will of the Egyptian people, should they democratically elect the Muslim Brotherhood, who I notice you refer to as the Brotherhood because it makes them sound more mysterious and dangerous, that actually we should start interfering then and telling Egyptians how they should vote and how their government should behave.
I hope I made it clear that I think that it would be regrettable for the Egyptian people, for the region and the international community if an extremist organisation like the Brotherhood took control of Egypt.
15 minutes, one hostile room, and one man who never softened. Murray never traded a position for applause. He named John Hurst. He named the girls taken out of school. He named the Brotherhood for what its founders were. Every time the argument got specific, his opponent reached for somebody else's speech or somebody else's motive. That is the whole modern debate in miniature. One side arguing about what is true, the other arguing about who else agrees with you. Did Murray expose something real here, or was Hasan right to push back? Drop your thoughts in the comments.